At exactly 2:17 in the afternoon, I felt my career tilt on its axis. The notification came through as a bland email titled Fleet Performance Reassessment, but the weight of the words settled like a brick in my chest. By the time I opened the conference room door, HR was already standing there, their faces a mix of fake concern and something that looked a lot like fear. I sat down, keeping my back straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "What's going on?" I asked, though I already sensed the answer. Colin Baxter, the company's new director of strategic transport, leaned forward with that rehearsed corporate smile. He had been here barely 6 months, a man with shiny cufflinks and a management style that reeked of buzzwords. "Olivia, we appreciate your contributions over these past 18 years, he began, his tone syrupy. "But due to ongoing fleet optimization initiatives, your performance-based incentive for this fiscal year has been recalibrated." I stared at him. "Recalibrated?" I repeated. Colin cleared his throat. "Yes, recalibrated to 0. Zo. The number echoed in my mind. That bonus was supposed to be $20,000, money I had already counted on. Not for luxuries, but for repairs on my house, college savings for my niece, and maybe, just maybe, a vacation I hadn't taken in almost a decade. HR shifted uncomfortably beside him. The young rep avoiding my eyes like I might burst into tears or flip the table. I did neither. Instead, I let silence stretch across the room until Colin started to fidget. "Times are tough," he added quickly, as if that explained everything. "We're cutting costs across all departments. It's not personal." I tilted my head slightly. Was this reviewed by the National Oversight Board? My voice was calm, almost too calm. That question caught him off guard. He blinked, hesitated for half a second. "It was an internal decision," he said finally. No hesitation could disguise the fact that I had found a weak point. "I see." I offered him a small, polite smile. "Thank you for clarifying." Colin looked relieved, like he expected me to protest or beg for reconsideration. Instead, I gathered my folder and stood. HR murmured something about understanding how disappointing this must be. I gave them a nod, no emotion, just quiet composure. What no one in that room knew was that I held a card far stronger than any bonus. Something my late father had placed in my hands a few months before he died. It wasn't just an inheritance. It was leverage. Legal leverage. As I walked out of the conference room, Colin called after me. "We really do value your loyalty, Olivia." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The wheels were already turning, and none of them had the faintest idea of the storm I was about to bring. By the time I reached my car in the parking lot, my face was still smooth, unreadable. Inside, though, something burned hot and sharp. 18 years of loyalty, erased with one corporate buzzword. They had no clue what kind of fight they had just picked. The drive home felt like moving through fog. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside I was boiling. 18 years of work, 18 years of late nights, winter storms, and crisis calls. And they handed me recalibration, like it was a prize. I unlocked my front door and dropped my bag by the entryway. The house was quiet. I didn't bother taking off my coat. Instead, I went straight to the top shelf of my office cabinet, where a faded leather folder sat untouched. Inside was the letter I had read only once, months ago, when grief over my father's passing had still been raw. The envelope was heavy, embossed with the seal of Davenport Knox, his longtime legal firm. I unfolded the letter slowly, like it might shatter. "Upon your 40th birthday, the following assets and contractual rights shall transfer to you." I read each line carefully this time, no longer numb, but keenly aware of its power. My father hadn't just left me money. He had left me control. The trust held freight corridor deeds spanning Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. Each deed tied into decades-old transport contracts, quietly co-managed by the same national logistics company that had just erased my bonus. Each contract carried successor clauses, a term my father underlined 3 times in his own pen. If the company engaged in mismanagement or violated fiduciary standards, I, as the successor, had the right to demand independent audits, terminate agreements, and collect full redemption value. The total asset valuation was staggering. $22 million. Dad always believed leverage was the only true form of protection. Don't trust what's printed on a check, he once told me. Trust the clause they hope you never read. I laid out the old contract copies on my kitchen table. Dates, signatures, regulatory conditions, all still valid. The company had been operating these freight corridors under the assumption that I was just another cog in their machine, a mid-level manager grateful for scraps. They had no clue I was also the gatekeeper to a substantial piece of their infrastructure pipeline. I pulled out my laptop and began mapping everything. I cross-referenced the contracts with recent performance audits I had access to from internal fleet reports. Fuel misallocations, inflated idle time penalties, and unnecessary routing. I started marking each violation with a red sticky note. By midnight, the table was covered in papers, my father's legacy spread out like a tactical map. I sat back and exhaled. This wasn't just about the $20,000 anymore. This was about a company that thought they could erase my worth while skimming millions from public contracts. My father had left me the tools to fight back. Now, for the first time, I intended to use them. 2 mornings after the recalibration, I sat in the marble lobby of Davenport Knox, the firm that had handled my father's affairs for decades. I'd called ahead and asked for Julia Hendricks by name. My father's old notes described her as sharp as a blade and twice as quick. I believed him the second I met her. Julia appeared in the doorway of the conference room, her expression neutral, but her presence commanding. "Miss Carrington," she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, her dark blazer as crisp as her voice. "You mentioned you have documentation that might interest us." I opened my leather folder and spread the freight corridor contracts across the table. My father's trust transferred these to me. I have reason to believe the current management has breached several clauses. Julia's gaze swept over the papers with meticulous focus. She didn't rush. She flipped each page as if weighing it in her mind. "These are not standard contracts," she said finally. "Your father was thorough. Successor clauses like these, they're rare. And powerful." "I've started reviewing internal audit data," I explained, sliding over a printed spreadsheet. "There are inconsistencies in municipal billing, maintenance budgets, and route expansion costs. None of it matches the operational metrics we report to public agencies." Julia scanned the numbers, tapping a pen against her notepad. "Overcharging municipalities for idle fleet hours," she muttered. "Route extensions with no public demand. This isn't sloppy accounting, Olivia. This is deliberate." I leaned forward. "How strong is this legally?" "Very strong," she said, without hesitation. "These findings constitute a direct breach of fiduciary responsibility under the Transport Oversight Regulations. If we file an official demand for contract termination, the company won't just lose these corridors, they'll be liable for full compensation." My pulse quickened. "How much are we talking?" Julia's eyes didn't leave the papers. Initial calculations put the total at $47 million. Possibly more, depending on penalties. We can pursue public arbitration if they resist, but given what you've brought, they'll want to settle quietly. 47 million. The number felt unreal, but I didn't flinch. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability, something my father preached with almost religious conviction. He had built his empire on strict principles, integrity, leverage, and the unshakable belief that power should be used to protect the public good. "What's our first move?" I asked. Julia set her pen down, her expression icy but resolute. "We compile every shred of evidence you have, down to the smallest audit report. Then we draft a formal notice invoking your rights as successor. Once they see your name and these documents, they'll know you can take them apart." I nodded, feeling a calm determination settle over me. "I'm ready." For the next 3 hours, Julia and I combed through my files. We organized routes, contracts, and financial statements into airtight folders. By the time we were done, I could see the shape of my strategy clearly. I walked out of Davenport Knox with a heavy briefcase in my hand and one clear thought. They had underestimated me for the last time. 1 week later, I walked into the local post office carrying a single certified letter. Inside was a formal demand for immediate termination and payout of all freight corridor contracts tied to my father's trust. Every sentence had been reviewed and sharpened by Julia Hendricks herself, designed to hit like a sledgehammer. The clerk stamped it, slid it into the outgoing tray, and that was it. Months of quiet preparation compressed into one envelope. By mid-morning, the notice would land in the legal department's inbox at headquarters. I returned to the office like it was any other Monday, blending into the familiar gray walls of fleet operations. No one had any idea that a legal time bomb was ticking toward them. At 11:22 a.m., Denise from legal, a friend I'd known since my first year with the company, sent me a text. "Denise, you didn't hear it from me, but the boardroom's on fire. What did you do?" I smiled and tucked my phone away. "Just staying busy," I murmured to myself, scrolling through fleet data as if nothing had changed. By noon, whispers started drifting around the floor. Senior managers were called upstairs. Colin Baxter, who had been swaggering around the past few weeks, stormed by my desk with his phone pressed hard to his ear. His voice was low but tense. Denise's next text confirmed it. "Denise, they're stunned. The letter's demanding $47 million. Baxter looks like he's going to choke." I kept my head down. The same man who had looked me in the eye and said, "Times are tough," was now scrambling to explain how one of his own fleet managers had the authority to yank $22 million in transport contracts out from under them. At 3 p.m., an emergency meeting was announced. All executives were pulled into the glass conference room on the 12th floor. I could see them from my window, stiff postures, frantic gestures, phones buzzing non-stop. Another ping from Denise. "Denise, board is furious. Apparently, the oversight clauses you invoked are airtight. Baxter's trying to downplay it, but he's cornered." I typed back a single line. "Good to know." The rest of the day, I moved quietly through my tasks like any other employee. I reviewed fleet schedules, sent a few updates, and pretended not to notice when Baxter walked by my desk with a face like cold steel. He didn't speak. He didn't even make eye contact. It was almost poetic. A week ago, they'd dismissed me with a corporate shrug. Now, the same executives who shrugged off my bonus were watching their empire buckle under the weight of a single clause they'd forgotten to read. As I locked up my desk for the night, my phone buzzed again. "Denise, they're in full damage control mode. Whatever you just started, they're terrified." I smiled all the way to my car. This was only the beginning. The first call came at 9:14 a.m., 2 days after my legal notice detonated inside the company. I recognized the number immediately, the firm's main switchboard, but the voice on the line wasn't one I'd heard before. "Olivia Carrington? This is Elliot Graves, chief counsel for the company. I'm hoping we can have a constructive conversation about resolving this misunderstanding." His tone was careful, a mixture of authority and forced calm. I let a pause hang before responding. "There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Graves. You've received the documents." "Yes, we have," he said quickly. "It's clear there's been some misalignment between contract interpretations and operational realities. What you've brought to our attention is, frankly, an opportunity for us to—" I cut him off. "Misalignment? Overcharging municipal clients isn't a misalignment. Extending routes for revenue padding isn't an interpretation issue. You and I both know that." There was a silence on the line. I could almost hear him recalculating his script. "Olivia, we value our long-standing relationship with you, both as an employee and as a stakeholder. What would it take for us to put this behind us?" Straight to the point. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. $47 million in contract redemption. Or full arbitration with public disclosure. "That number seems ambitious," he said, carefully choosing the word. "Perhaps there's a middle ground we can reach." "I don't deal in vague middle grounds," I replied evenly. "Either the company honors its obligations under the successor clauses, or I file for arbitration next week. Those are the terms." Graves cleared his throat. "I'm sure you're aware arbitration could be messy for everyone involved. Headlines, investor calls, regulatory reviews." "I'm aware," I said. "And I'm comfortable with it." There was a beat of silence, the kind where you can tell the other person is swallowing pride. "If we were to consider your figure," he said slowly, "would you be open to discussing alternative structures? Consulting contracts, perhaps?" "Send me your proposal," I replied. "But understand something, Mr. Graves. This isn't about anger or revenge. It's about correcting a system that's been failing the public. I won't settle for anything less than accountability. When I ended the call, I felt a quiet satisfaction. He'd tried to sound in control, but the tremor in his voice gave him away. They were already on the defensive. I glanced at my father's letter on my desk, the faded ink underlining, "Leverage is the language of respect." Graves had just learned that lesson the hard way. By Thursday morning, panic had set in. Denise's texts painted the picture vividly. An all-day board session, directors whispering about catastrophic exposure, and Baxter pacing the 12th floor hallway like a man staring at his career's end. The CEO, Malcolm Voss, had been called back from an investor retreat in Aspen. By late afternoon, I received the call I knew was coming. "Olivia Carrington?" The voice on the line was smooth but strained. "This is Malcolm Voss. I'd like to meet with you. In person." I didn't make it easy. "About the 47 million? I asked. A pause. "Yes. Among other matters." I agreed, but I chose the location, his office, the top floor of headquarters. The same office where I'd once delivered quarterly fleet updates as a mid-level manager, nodding along while senior executives talked over me. This time, the power dynamic would be reversed. When I arrived, Voss stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his designer suit crisp, his expression composed but tired. "Olivia," he said, gesturing toward a leather chair. "I want to cut through the noise. You've made your point, a powerful one." "I'm not here to make points," I said evenly, taking a seat. "I'm here to fix a system that's been broken for years. You've been billing municipalities for services they never needed, and these contracts," I tapped my folder, "are my leverage to stop it." Voss folded his hands. "Let's be practical. What would it take to resolve this without arbitration?" I looked him straight in the eye. Full redemption of the contracts, 47 million, plus a formal restructuring of the freight oversight unit. He leaned back, exhaling. 47 million is not feasible. "Then arbitration will be," I replied calmly. "And the documents will become public record. I doubt your investors will like that." For the first time, his confident mask cracked. "What exactly do you want, Olivia?" "I want systemic reform. I want Colin Baxter removed from his position, effective immediately. I want every municipal contract reviewed and renegotiated under fair terms. And," I paused, "I want to take over the oversight and compliance unit. Not as an employee, as a 5-year consultant with full authority to implement ethical reforms." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You're asking for a seat at the table." "I'm asking for accountability. And I'm the only one who can rebuild the trust you've already lost." Voss stood, pacing by the window. I could tell he was weighing the cost of fighting me versus the cost of conceding. "You're serious about all of this," he said finally. "Very," I answered. "And I'm not here to negotiate down. I'm offering a lifeline, one that keeps this out of the headlines." He nodded slowly. "I'll present this to the board." I gathered my papers and stood. "Do that. But know this, I'm not bluffing. If I don't hear back by Monday, I'll move forward." Voss didn't respond, but his silence spoke volumes. 6 days. That's how long it took for the board to cave. By the following Monday, Denise's texts were coming rapid fire. "Denise, the board is split, but legal says arbitration would kill them. Denise, Baxter is furious. Rumor is he's blaming you for all of it. Denise, HR is prepping a resignation memo. It's vague, but he's gone." I wasn't surprised. Baxter was a perfect scapegoat, all swagger and zero foresight. He hadn't lasted a full year before alienating every regional manager. His optimization initiatives now looked like negligence under the microscope of my evidence. On Wednesday morning, the official memo went out. "Colin Baxter has decided to pursue other opportunities outside the company. We thank him for his contributions and wish him success." Not a single word of truth, but the halls hummed with quiet satisfaction. The bigger win came 2 hours later, when I received a formal call from Malcolm Voss. His tone had shifted entirely. "Olivia," he said, "the board has reviewed your terms. They've agreed to the consulting arrangement you proposed. 5 years, with complete oversight authority of municipal contracts. We'd like to finalize the agreement this week. Good, I replied. I'll have Julia review the final draft. There was a pause, then Voss added. For what it's worth, I think you've forced this company to face some hard truths. We needed this wake-up call. Don't thank me, I said. Just fix it. The settlement replaced the payout demand with something better. A leadership role, where I held the reins of reform. My consulting contract came with a salary that dwarfed any bonus I'd ever hoped for. And with it, the power to rebuild the entire ethics and compliance structure. By Friday, I was sitting in Baxter's old office. Temporarily, I told myself, reviewing stacks of municipal contracts. The walls still displayed his hollow leadership quotes like, "Efficiency drives excellence." I almost laughed. Clients started to hear about the changes, too. Denise forwarded me a chain of emails from city transit managers, all relieved by the promise of rate corrections and transparent billing. One line from a Cincinnati official stood out. Finally, someone on your side who values public trust over profit margins. The shift within the office was quieter but no less palpable. People who had avoided me during the chaos were suddenly stopping by my desk to offer small congratulations. A few whispered that they admired how I had stood my ground. None of it felt like a victory lap. It felt like a correction. A long overdue reset for a company that had forgotten who it served. When I left that evening, the office lights reflected off the elevator doors like a faint mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back. She wasn't the quiet operations manager anymore. She was the one who had refused to be dismissed, and won. On my first day in Baxter's former office, I walked in with a single box of personal items and a framed clause I'd written out the night before. Failure to comply with fiduciary standards may result in structural collapse. I placed it on the wall where his drive results, not excuses poster once hung. It wasn't motivational fluff, it was a promise. I spent the next week dismantling his shallow systems. The numbers told their own story. Millions in misallocated municipal costs hidden under vague line items. Contracts were bloated with unnecessary surcharges, and maintenance budgets were deliberately inflated. I flagged every discrepancy, forwarding them to both internal audit and legal teams for corrective action. The changes were immediate. Rates for municipal clients were rolled back to fair, transparent terms. For the first time in years, city managers called the company to say thank you. That alone told me how low the bar had been set under Baxter's watch. I started a new initiative for the fleet managers, a training program built on compliance, ethics, and accountability. No more corners cut, no more creative billing. I brought in Julia Hendricks as a guest speaker for the opening session. She didn't mince words. Ethics, she told them, is not a soft concept. It's the foundation of your survival in this industry. 3 managers who had been quiet for years came forward during those early sessions. Each of them carried stories of bonuses slashed, safety concerns ignored, or invoices altered under pressure from higher-ups. Their experiences confirmed what I had already suspected. The problem wasn't isolated. It was systemic. We set up an anonymous reporting channel, a direct pipeline to my office. Within days, it filled with tips about overlooked audits and unapproved route charges. Rather than overwhelm me, it fueled me. This was exactly why I had taken the role. Late one evening, as I organized reports, I found myself staring at the old letter from my father. His handwriting was sharp, deliberate, with a single line underlined twice. Leverage is meaningless unless used to set things right. I finally understood what he had meant. His legacy wasn't just in the assets he left behind, but in the philosophy he had drilled into me. Wealth meant nothing without integrity. Power meant nothing without purpose. The company was changing, but more importantly, so was I. I was no longer the quiet operations manager, grateful for whatever the corporate ladder allowed me to hold. I had become the architect of something better. A culture where accountability wasn't just a buzzword but the standard. When I locked the office that night, I paused for a moment, looking at the framed clause on the wall. It wasn't just a warning for others. It was a reminder for me. My father's vision was alive again, this time through me.